I'm here with Tom Hall, one of our longtime BCI conductors. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm good, Frank. How are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Last saw each other over the summer, this past summer.
We did, and it was a rough summer for you, as I recall.
It was a rough summer, yes, and the roughness continues in other ways
Yeah.
nowadays.
I went on
But
stage and you went in the hospital, as I recall. Yeah. But I'm glad you're feeling better from what
thank
I'm
you.
told.
I am. I'm doing very, very well. Thank you so much. Um, I always like to begin these interviews by asking our conductors to give a brief musical bio. How did you make your way into music as a profession in general and then in specific as a conductor? I know many of our singers will have heard the story, having sung with you, but many who are listening today may not know you as well. So,
Well, it's interesting. Up until I took a full-time job as a radio host, in my entire life, I held two positions that weren't professional musical positions. I was a bag boy or a cashier at a grocery store in the eighth grade in Dover, Massachusetts, and I was the buyer for a record store in Atlanta for a couple of years.
huh.
And other than that, I have made my living since the age of 12 as a professional musician. If you qualify professional as being paid for it, I got my first paying gig when I was 12 years old, playing a cocktail party for a lady in the neighborhood whose husband worked for the Honeywell Corporation, and I played background music for that cocktail party. And I've sort of been at it ever since. I was a lounge lizard in college. That's how I put myself through music school at Ithaca College in upstate New York, playing bars and nightclubs by night and studying classical music by day. And then I went to graduate school after a year in Atlanta, singing with Robert Shaw in the Atlanta Symphony Chorus and teaching public school music. And I had a church job there at a big Episcopal church on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. And then I went to graduate school in Boston at Boston University, where you and I first met each other during those years through our mutual friend Cheryl Bensman.
Yes.
And Trudy Weaver was part of that whole group and stuff. So you guys were in New York, and Cheryl and I were in Boston, and we all got together then back in the day. This was a while ago. This was late 70s, early 80s. And then after 4 years in Boston, I went to Baltimore to take a job as a music director of the Baltimore Choral Arts Society. And God bless them, they hired me. I was a 26-year-old kid who didn't know nothing, and they overlooked that, and the board of directors did, and they hired me, and I had 35 wonderful years as the music director of the Baltimore Choral Arts Society. And then in that time, I also snuck in a doctorate in choral conducting from the University of Maryland. So I've just been very blessed to have a career that's allowed me to make some great music with great folks and great friends like you. And I just feel very lucky. And now I'm not doing it full time anymore. I am a host of a daily public affairs talk show on the NPR affiliate in Baltimore, WYPR Radio. But I do very much enjoy the occasional gigs that I do, like with BCI. I guess it was last summer in Richmond, Virginia, and hope we can do that again sometime. And I do look forward to doing the occasional gig here and there. And so I'm very blessed. And
Yeah.
anyway,
Wonderful. You first conducted, well, first of all, I should say you've conducted for us in many of our venues, Sheffield and Santa Fe and Canterbury, Vancouver, most recently in Richmond, as you say. You first conducted for us in 1997. It was Creation in Sheffield. Did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into and in for, I should say?
well, I had been trying to get hired by BCF at that point for quite a while, and I know you and Trudy and some others were putting in good words for me. But there were a number of wonderful conductors who were sort of in the rotation at that time. So it took a few years for folks at BCF to take a gander and take a chance on me. And once they did, then I'm delighted to say that it's been a fairly regular thing ever since. So I knew of BCF because I had a lot of friends who both conducted and sang as soloists with the chorus, and I know we had a number of people from the Baltimore Choral Arts Society who sang as choristers. So I certainly knew it by reputation. It had a wonderful reputation then, as it still does. And so it was a thrill to be able to come up and to Sheffield from Baltimore and do the creation, which is a piece that I just love. And that was the first of many very, very gratifying and wonderful collaborations that I've had with Berkshire Choral International. I just feel, really delighted and honored to have been asked back so many times.
Any particular standout memories that you have, good or challenging over the years?
Well, actually, in that performance of the creation back in 1997, David Evans, a wonderful baritone, was singing. We were in the hockey rink in Sheffield, with it's covered, but the sides are open, so it's kind of half al fresco, and right before David got to the aria in which he talked about the great worms, a fly flew into David's mouth. And he didn't come in. So I did a little introduction with the orchestra, and then David isn't singing. And so I'm looking at him, David, David. And I start singing his part for him under my breath, because I figure he's just spaced out somehow. But in fact, he's trying to swallow an insect so that he can start singing. And he finally got the insect swallowed and was able to proceed with the aria. But that's a moment that I'll never forget, and I know he never forgot it either.
So but, what is that song? I don't know why he swallowed the fly.
Yeah. It would have been a good time to switch repertoire at that moment. I do remember also in Canterbury, right before I went out to begin the concert, the dean of the cathedral, and you were one of the baritone soloists in that.
Yes.
The dean of the Canterbury Cathedral gave me a great honor, which he gave to all of the conductors at BCI who appeared there. He took me over to this book, and he said, "We want you to sign the book. Anybody who preaches at the cathedral or performs at the cathedral signs this book." And he says, "We refer to this one as the new book." And I say, "Why is that the new book?" And he said, "Well, the old book burned down. I mean, it was burned and destroyed." And I said, "Well, when did that happen?" And he said, like 1490 or something. So this was the new book that had started in 1490. But that book had been signed by Martin Luther King and Reinhold Niebuhr and all sorts of very, very famous people. So what a thrill it was to be honored to be asked to sign the book. So I signed the book, and then I turned around and walked out, and we began Israel and Egypt. So I'll never forget that either.
Wow. I should mention that the other baritone soloist, Colin Baldy, we sang the duet, "The Lord is the Man of War," has been a conductor for us and will be interviewed in one of our subsequent interviews this summer.
Give Colin my best. What a wonderful guy.
Certainly will. It's been one of my joys going around as a musician into all these theaters that have such history. And you think about all of the wonderful performers, conductors, singers, instrumentalists, actors, dancers who have been there before you. And it's it's a really palpable feeling.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's great.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, you are now a full-time radio host in Baltimore at the NPR affiliate there. WYPR, is that correct?
WYPR, right? Yes. Your public radio.
Can you talk a little bit about the transition? I know you were doing some part-time radio hosting. Your transition from being a full-time conductor to being a radio host.
Well, it all happened very serendipitously and without anything having to do with me. But in 2003, the general manager of the radio station came to me and asked if I would host a weekly show about the Baltimore Choral Arts Society. I was the music director there, of course, and the station had just started broadcasting a show about the Baltimore Symphony. And he said, don't want the symphony to be the only arts organization represented on the station. We'd like the choral arts to do. So would you do a weekly show? And I said, no, I can't do a weekly show. That's too much work. I'll do it once a month. So they said, okay. So we came up with a show called Choral Arts Classics. You've appeared on that program. And I would play tapes of the concerts that the Choral Arts Society gave and speak to maybe the composer of the piece, if he or she were still alive, or the soloists, or somebody who was involved in the production one way or the other, maybe a historian to talk a little bit about the piece itself. And so we did that once a month for 3 years. And then in 2006, they decided to start a new program in the morning called Maryland Morning, which was a kind of extension of Morning Edition. So it came on after Morning Edition finished at 9 o'clock in the morning. And they asked if I would co-host that program and do mostly cultural arts related segments. And the convenience of that was that that show was on tape. So I could tape things. So when I was guest conducting, for example, when I would do my BCI weeks, or if I would go off someplace else, in months like December, there were many years in which I was never home in December, or I was only home once a week for the rehearsals in Baltimore, and then I would run out and do Messiah somewhere. I could tape as many things as I wanted to. So I could tape things way in advance and just have them there. So it seemed like a good deal. And it also, at that point, I was traveling a lot. My daughter was a senior in high school, and I had missed a lot of events that Miranda was involved in because I was on the road. So this did allow me to replace some of the income I was making as a guest conductor with income as a broadcast journalist, and it kept me in town. So her senior year in high school, I was able to go to the plays and the chorus concerts and the events that she was involved in, and that was really great. And then a few years later, they switched the schedule around a little bit, and I started hosting the morning show by myself. And at that point, I knew that I had to retire from the Choral Arts Society. You couldn't do 2 full-time jobs. Hosting a daily radio show is definitely a full-time job, and running an arts organization is a full-time job.
Right.
So I hosted the morning show by myself for an hour in 2015, and then in 2016 started hosting the noonday show, which is called Midday. And that's a live show. So I'm in town, and I host it from right here at the moment because of coronavirus. I'm hosting it from my family room. My wife is a senior editor and writer at Johns Hopkins Medicine. She does all of the, or many of the web postings and publications of Johns Hopkins Medicine. So she's very busy in the kitchen, and I'm very busy up on the second floor hosting the show. And then we meet at around 6:30 every night after work, and we take a walk around a beautiful park that's right up the street from our house. So we're in a very different rhythm now.
Yes.
But I've been hosting this. It's an hour-long show on public policy, on politics, on education, on race, on religion. We talk about medical advances. Of course, lately we've been talking an awful lot about coronavirus and the various, aspects of that. And I interview politicians. I interview people who are running for office. I interview people who are in office. We talk to national politicians and local politicians. We have a big election coming up in June. We're taping this about a week before that election. So I have had many, many conversations with people who are standing for election to let voters know, what their options are and what the resonances are with various candidates and their positions. So I think that that's a very exciting and worthwhile endeavor for our community. So, the transition just sort of happened naturally. Baltimore Choral Arts Society hired a wonderful young guy named Blake Clark to be the new music director. He's in his 3rd season and has done quite well by all reports. So, I felt very blessed to have been part of the Baltimore Choral Arts Society family for 35 years. I feel very blessed to be part of a team that is, in some way helping, I hope, to shape the conversation about public policy here in the Mid-Atlantic region. So again, I just feel very lucky to have stumbled into all of the stuff I've stumbled into.
Mm.
Uh,
It's fascinating. And of course, you've always been such an intellectually curious person and so well read. And now that's part of your profession where you have
yeah,
to be, and you have to be up on topics. Does it ever seem a little bit overwhelming to you? Are you able to sort of keep up with it all?
it seems overwhelming every day, and especially because of COVID-19 and coronavirus. I mean, what's happening is that we're finding that in order to stay relevant and really give listeners things that are timely and very important, that a number of times we will plan to do a show on a certain topic, and I'll wake up at 5:30 that morning and take my run, and then come back and realize that by 8 o'clock we have to change the topic and we have to get new guests. So there's a lot of that hustling around. It's a pretty busy newsroom, although it's a disjunct newsroom. One of my producers is in Chicago, another is in Columbia, Maryland, which folks familiar with the Baltimore area knows about 40 minutes out of town, and the other's in Silver Spring, and I'm here in Baltimore. So we are doing everything remotely. We do a lot of Zoom meetings, but we just try to do things that are timely and that are important and that are responding to what's on people's minds. But the other thing is, these days and for the past many years now, when I read a book, I get to talk to the person who wrote it. And that's kind of fun, and I've gotten to talk to wonderful authors, both fiction and nonfiction. But I've had a chance to have hour-long conversations with James McBride and Ann Patchett and Alice McDermott and Ann Tyler and wonderful fiction
Oh,
writers.
fabulous. I mean, it doesn't happen so much when you're conducting Mozart and Brahms.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've had very few conversations with them. Although I don't know, four or five beers into the evening, you never know who you end up talking to.
Very often when my students ask me a question, my answer is, well, someday when I meet Brahms, I'll ask him for you. We hope not for a good long while.
And let's hope that that's not for a while.
That's right, exactly.
Well, I think that being a conductor and being an interviewer are very similar things, actually, because when you open up a score, you open up the Mozart Requiem or the Brahms Requiem or, any great piece or even any not so great piece, you have to say first and foremost, well, what does this person mean to say? What is animating this person? What is the composer's aspiration here? What makes this person tick? And what is the musical product that is representative of that person's heart and compassion and soul? And that's really not all that different when you're talking to a United States senator or a governor or a mayor. What makes this person tick? What is it about this person that is going to equip her or him to be the leader that we need in our communities, both at the local and state and federal level? So it's about what is behind people's motivation, what is behind people's thought process, what is making their contribution special. So in a way, there I see them as parallel endeavors.
Oh, very interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about when you open a new piece of music, what your process is? I think a lot of our singers are sort of fascinated, how does the conductor do what he or she needs to do? There's so many moving parts happening at the same time. How do you learn that? How do you know what to listen for? So can you talk a little bit about your process and what that's been in learning music?
Well, it's of course different for every piece. It's a very different endeavor when I'm picking up a piece I've conducted a number of times as opposed to a piece that is brand new. But early in my career, the great masterpieces were brand new to me. I mean, so we all started at one point, her and I, and did our first Mozart Requiem, our first Brahms Requiem, our first B minor Mass, our first, Creation and Seasons, and Messiah. I mean, Messiah is a piece I've conducted more than 200 times in performance. And that means I've done 200 dress rehearsals of it. So I've been through that song a couple of times. So sometimes it's a matter of, what can I bring to that piece now that I couldn't bring 30 years ago when I first conducted it, or 40 years ago. But I think generally, if it's a choral piece or an opera, I start with the words. What is the story about? What is the narrative? What is the thing that makes the poetry or the biblical passage sparkle? I remember years ago when I was in Boston, I had a chance to meet Randall Thompson and spend the afternoon with him at his beautiful home in Cambridge, right near Harvard University. And I was doing a concert of the works of Randall Thompson, and he very generously agreed to meet with me for several hours one afternoon to talk about what pieces we should pick. We wanted to do a sort of survey of the choral music of Randall Thompson. I'll never forget. He had this beautiful, gigantic, gorgeous home with a great garden in the back. He joked to me that the revenue he got from the royalties for the Alleluia paid the annual salary of his gardener. and I think the gardener was well paid. And the garden was spectacular. It was just spectacular. But in this gigantic, beautiful house, we go down the stairs into this teeny little room that looked like a bad family room out of the 1960s. It had the wood paneling and stuff, and it was teeny, and there was a piano there and a bunch of music piled up all over the place. So we started talking about possibilities, and he would pick up a piece, like maybe the Frostiana poems or something like that. And he would open it up and he'd say, the text. And he was just so connected to the words that he had chosen to set to music. And then he'd pick up another piece, was in a totally different thing, something about the American Revolution or something. And he would pick it up and say, the text. And he even said the same thing when he picked up his score of the Alleluia. The text. There's two words in it. Yes. Alleluia, amen. So I think starting with the words is a good place to start. What do the words mean outside of their musical set? And then once they're set to music, what do we know about the words because of the music that we didn't know before? And that's the trick to great choral music, certainly, and great opera, where a libretto can be brought to life in a way that it cannot be brought to life if you're simply reading it dry or reciting it in speech. So that's the point of choral music, is to illuminate and elucidate and enlarge the words that the composer has chosen. So then the rest of it is kind of technical. Then you take it a phrase at a time. And what's happening in this phrase? What's the voice that we really need to make sure we hear? What are the voices that are subordinate? What are the particular things about the orchestration that can sparkle and can be something really good? I'll never forget the first time I conducted the B minor Mass, which is, of course, considered one of the great masterpieces of humankind. And my teacher, Tom Dunn, who was a wonderful influence and a wonderful guy and just a genius musician, told me, because I remember saying to him, I was in my 20s, and I said, "Oh, Tom, this piece is it's too overwhelming. I mean, it's the B minor Mass. I'm not up to it. I'm not." And he says to me, "Oh, shut up." He said, "Take it one phrase at a time. You just start at the beginning, and you go through the first phrase, and then you go to the second phrase, and then you put those two together, and then by the time you're done, you're done."
Oh, wow!
Quit complaining and get to work.
Isn't that great?
That's what I did, and it's a great thing. I mean, some pieces. I remember the first time I did the St. Matthew Passion, I took a year to learn it. I had sung it as a singer on several occasions, so it wasn't like it was a foreign animal to me. But I took a whole year because I thought, I'm just going to sort of break this down into place. So I spent a few weeks playing and singing all of the recitatives. I did a few weeks playing and singing all of the arias. I took a few weeks looking at the choruses. I analyzed the biblical part of it, the way that libretto had been put together with the commentary and the biblical passages. And I realized when I programmed it, which was in the spring of 1991, that I would need to start the previous summer.
Hmm.
I did. And as Tom Dunn said, I shut up and I just took it one phrase at a time.
That's right. One step at a time, and there
Exactly.
you get to where you need to go.
Yeah.
Um, and lastly, just because I think we have to talk a little bit about the current state of the art, and you mentioned dealing with COVID-19 as a radio host. Um, any thoughts? None of us knows, of course, where we're going or when we'll get there, but any thoughts about how this will affect choral music, where we are, where we might be going?
It will affect all of the performing arts in a profound way. Theater, uh, live music of any kind of art that involves, communicating and sharing with an audience, because audiences are not going to be gathering together in concert halls or other like venues for the foreseeable future. Um, so it will change things in profound ways. Uh, I think the people who have, put together these marvelous things that Eric Whitaker was doing years ago, way before the COVID-19 pandemic, where he was taping people one at a time and then editing them together. Now, when Eric started doing this, I don't know how many years ago it was a huge production. It was a huge project for an audio engineer to splice together all of these individual parts. Now there are people doing it on their laptops in their living room while they're sitting home socially isolated because of COVID-19. So the technology has gotten better so that those kinds of things now can be made available to people to consume online. But the experience of choral music isn't singing by yourself. The experience of choral music is singing with everybody else. So I would hope that at some point over the next few months or years, the technology catches up with choral music. Right now, the technology, the limitations are that people's internet speeds are different. So it's very difficult for people to sing together in this format with Zoom, because your internet may be faster than mine, and then the two of us aren't going to be together. So anybody who's tried that, or zoomed into a church service or a synagogue service in which people are trying to sing together knows the limitations. But they have figured out so many other things. I mean, in December of 2019, 200,000 people had used Zoom, and by March of 2020, it was 400 million. Yeah. So people have figured out. I mean, had you ever heard of the word Zoom before? And last fall,
Yeah, right. And I wish I had bought stock in Zoom and Netflix.
Exactly. So I think there will be some technical innovations that help the choral art to be disseminated online, because that's going to have to be part of it. The thing that gives me hope about choral music in particular, as opposed to, say, orchestral music, is that there are choruses that can function with relatively small numbers of people, and they can present concerts in venues that don't fit 2,500 people in a symphony hall. So I think the minimization of both the performing forces and the audience can work to the favor of choral musicians in a way that it can't to orchestral musicians. Jazz musicians are kind of used to this. Jazz clubs, rarely hold more than 300 or 400 people, if that. And they're used to that intimacy. And choral music has the potential to be quite intimate in that way. But we're going to just have to see. And what we'll also see is, just as we saw, for example, after 9/11, we'll see composers and poets and musicians of all stripes responding to this challenge and creating work that is, a response and that resonates with the experience we're all having being by ourselves and isolated. Choral music is the antithesis to isolation. It's also, unfortunately, one of the most dangerous endeavors and exercises at this moment. In Singapore, for example, the first instance of community transmission they found of COVID-19 was in a chorus.
Mm.
Because the spittle just comes out when you're singing, even more so than when you're talking. And all of us who've ever sung in a chorus know, that guy behind you is spitting on your neck, in the middle of the fast passages. But, it was a chorus that they quarantined immediately in Singapore. 3 of the 45 people in that chorus passed away. I think 20 or so were COVID positive, but they quarantined everybody, and they were able to stop the transmission pretty quickly. But that's what they noticed in Singapore, that it was a chorus that was one of the epicenters. So we have to figure that out. We have to figure out how to do this safely. This is a virus that we don't know by any means everything about. We will be learning more about it. And once there's a vaccine and we conquer the challenges of disseminating that vaccine widely, we conquer the challenges of the supply chain, that it will still be a challenge. I mean, I talked to an expert the other day who says we have to make sure we have enough needles and vials and stoppers and swabs and PPE. I mean, these are still, the PPE shortages are still problems now, and we are, 10 weeks into this ordeal. I did my first story about COVID-19 on January 29th. And we knew even less about it then. And each week we learn more and more. And some of what we learn is terrifying. Some of what we learn is heartening. Some of what we see with the brave people who are treating people who are unfortunate enough to be sick is so inspiring. But keep in mind that 80% of the people who do get infection survive the illness. So there are reasons to be hopeful rather than hopeless. But I think there's no doubt that choral music has a steep hill to climb to figure out how to return to some semblance of normalcy. But if the technical innovations do continue to improve, the new normal, ultimately could end up being better and a better experience for the audience and singers than what we're currently used to.
Yes, well, great. And among conductors and arts organizations, it's a small world, and there are so many people who know so many people and can share ideas and experiences that's very hopeful for the future as well.
Yeah, I know Chorus America is doing their conference virtually, and there'll be a lot of people, spreading and sharing ideas. And I think, there are things that we haven't thought of yet that someone will think of, that we at the moment can't imagine. And, because the spirit of choral music and the spirit of choral singers and conductors and people in our beautiful art form is so vital and is so inspirational to each other and to the world. Choral music has proven to be something that's of lasting importance. And when we talk about lasting, we're talking about centuries of lasting importance. We're not talking about it's been important for the last 8 months.
The old book and the new book.
The old book and the new book, exactly.
To wrap things up, bring it full circle. Tom, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's great to see you and talk to you and to be in touch in this, virtual way with all of my many, many friends who we've worked with over the years at BCI.
Great. And now I think we'll have a chance to open up for some questions and answers.